And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our first speaker today. Michelle Pletch is a strategical solutions leader who partners with organizations to design learning and performance initiatives that align business goals, execution, realities, and measurable outcomes. She currently serves as the Vice President of Strategic Solutions at ELB, where she works closely with clients, sales leaders, and internal teams to shape solutions that are both compelling and operational sound. So with that, Michelle, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. I can see that there's lots of people here from different parts of the country. I am in Central Virginia, about an hour outside of Richmond. So see a couple of, for at least one, Sandra, Virginia person here. So good to see you and good to see everybody else. We are headquartered in Utah, which I did see there's at least one person there. So excited to be here with you and hope you get a lot out of today's session. So I will get started. And do feel free. Oops, let me make sure that's shared the right thing here. Sorry about that. Kind of jumped on me. Here we go. We're going to get there.
I know technology is
Sorry,
sometimes
it's technical difficulties. One second. Hold on one second. Oh, I know why. I haven't hit to do the presentation yet. All right, we're going to get there with us. All right, can everybody see? Okay, I hope. All right, great. Thank you for the reactions and the thumbs up. And do feel free to throw things in the chat. Liz, let me know if we've got a lot of questions over there. But welcome. And so today we're going to be diving into a topic that I think is going to resonate with pretty much everybody, whether you are a user of AI, which is pretty much everybody, but if you're also a manager or a leader leading your organization, it's really going to take a little bit different of a spin on a lot of the AI topics that I know we have talked about recently. I'm sure everyone has, but how to actually turn AI spend into bottom line impact. So we're going to dive into that today, and just hope that everybody gets a lot out of it. And again, any questions, throw them in the chat. But again, my name is Michelle Pletch, VP of Strategic Solution Development at ELB Learning. And overall, today we're going to focus on, kind of one question that we're hearing everywhere right now. A couple of years ago, everything was all a buzz, and it still is around AI. But now that we've been in it for a little while, everyone's kind of asking the same question in a little bit different manner, depending on who's asking it. Coming from a leadership perspective, a lot of leaders are looking at, their bottom line and saying we have spent a ton of money implementing AI initiatives, buying tools, but they're not seeing it move the needle. Managers are saying, we've enabled our teams with all of these tools, but our people are still overwhelmed. Their jobs aren't getting easier, faster. And then everyday users are being expected to use these tools, but they're trying to figure out how exactly they're supposed to use it. How is it actually going to make our jobs easier? It's all really that same tension, just coming at it from different angles. So today we're going to unpack why that's happening, why so many big, expensive, sometimes time-consuming AI initiatives start really strong. Everyone's really excited about them, but then they stall out. And more importantly, what actually makes the biggest difference between buying the tools, buying capability, and then really building any change that is measurable and that you can see and feel. So that's what we're going to dive into today. And if this picture looks or feels familiar to anybody, you're definitely not alone. I have been there. I think we've all been there. We are using more tools probably than ever. Almost all of us are juggling a dozen or more applications between our emails and project management tools, collaboration platforms, those of us in L&D, LMS platforms, and authoring tools. And now as you've learned those over the years, now suddenly almost all of them have changed. AI has been layered on top of it. And sometimes it seems like a quick and easy change to the tool, and sometimes it's really overwhelming and you're not really sure how to utilize it. Most people that I talk to on a day-to-day basis aren't necessarily feeling like they're more effective in their jobs, like their jobs are easier, they're saving time. A lot of people just feel busier, have different expectations, and are really frustrated. Especially because that frustration is especially stemming from they feel like their job should be easier, things should be moving faster. If you look at your own organization, they've probably invested in various AI tools, whether they be your kind of enterprise level Copilot or Chat GPT or something embedded in your LMS or a new AI powered authoring tool. So the licenses are there. You may have had some training on how to use them generally, what their basic capabilities are. Um, but at the end of the day, the real question is where is the measurable impact of bringing all these tools in? Because for most of us at this point, it's really not a capability issue. The tools are there, they exist, and you have them and you have access to them. But if access and tools aren't the issue, then, it's got to be something else. It's not the technology necessarily. So why aren't we feeling that lift, that lightened load, if all of those things are now at our fingers? Because it's really easy to assume that once a tool is selected, rolled out, hopefully you've gone through some training that, the hard part's done. You can kind of dust your hands off and everything's gonna get easier for you. But in most organizations, that's kind of where the implementation stops, right? You have the access, you attend the training, you understand how it basically works. But for some reason, a lot of us, and I can say for me, this has been true as well, we still kind of go back to our old habits at the end of the day. We've all done this not only with AI, this is certainly not unique to AI, but we do this in our daily lives as well. You buy something you're convinced is going to make your life easier. For me personally, I am addicted to kitchen gadgets. I love to get them. I watch a lot of Food Network, and I see something on there. I think it's going to change the way I prepare meals for my family, and the dogs to, forever. It's just going to make everything easier. And I get it. And then a few weeks later, I'm back to using the same manual tool that I've always used, so doing it the way I always did it. And the tool was fine, right? There was nothing wrong with it. My access didn't change. But for some reason, I just reverted back to the way I've always done things. And it really correlates well to a lot of the new tools that we have, inside all of our organizations. We build capacity, we know the basics, but we haven't really built in change. And those are really two different things, capacity and capability versus change. And digital fluency isn't just knowing how to use a tool. It's actually consistently choosing to do work differently because it produces better results. And having the environment and expectations and support systems needed to reinforce that shift, right? That's where the real gap in organizations usually is. So what we've noticed is that when AI implementation and transformation is not done successfully, it's not random. There's usually some of the same underlying issues that we're seeing. It's an obvious pattern when change sticks and when it doesn't. And it's not usually about the tool itself, not how advanced the tool is, not how many licenses are purchased. And often, despite being in the training space for many years, it's often not because of the training itself. It's about a few very specific shifts in how work is introduced, supported, and measured. And it'll be myself and a colleague, Gary Lamach, have been working through this 4E model, the explore, embed, enable, and evaluate. And that's what we're going to go through today. And it really gives us a practical way to diagnose where things are breaking down. And as we walk through them, I want you to really just be thinking about how this relates to your own organization. So hopefully you can take some of these things back, whether you're a leader, everyday, user of these tools. Think about where you're strong and where something might be missing. So the first E, as I mentioned, is explore. When we look at organizations that struggle, one pattern that quickly shows up is they start with the tool. It is, as I mentioned with the kitchen gadgets, it's that shiny object syndrome, right? We see something, we hear about something, it looks like it's just going to make a world of difference, and you bring that tool in. That's where a lot of organizations start, right? You might get an email that says, you've been signed up for this new tool, maybe a little blurb about what it can do, but it's not really specific enough for you to envision personally how it's going to help you do your job better or more efficiently. And if your company has thought through it a little further, hopefully they have, you've signed up for some basic company-wide training. It gives you the basics of how to prompt, the basics of how to upload information. But while none of that's wrong and all of it is needed, it's not where we need to start if you want to actually find measurable change, right? If you want, as I mentioned, transformation. When we do talk to organizations that are seeing real results, we're seeing again a pattern, right? Instead of starting with the tool, they're starting finding out where there's friction in the work itself. They're talking not only to leaders, but they're talking to everyone across the organization and asking questions like, where is time being lost right now? Where are things getting stuck? What things feel unnecessarily manual? We all have those parts of our job that we're just like, oh, I just wish I could automate this. Those tedious little tasks. And what are people complaining about? And maybe just accept it as, this is just the way that is. Like, this is just the way things are. When you start with where the friction is, right? Not where the tool can do, but the problem we're trying to solve, it changes everything, right? The tool becomes the means and not the headline or the goal. When you do that, that's when you can actually see a change in not only the way it's working, but the way it's accepted by people across the organization. Through each of the E's, we're going to talk about the patterns we see, and again, try to think back to your own organization. And I'll go back to my little kitchen gadget story. I have some that absolutely work. The mashed potatoes are done and on the table a heck of a lot faster than they were before. It does exactly what it said it would do. But at the end of the day, for some reason, as I mentioned, I go back to the way I was doing it before. Tool's not broken, it's still there. But when I have to factor everything in, pulling it out, using it, the time it takes to clean it, it's not actually saving me time, right? Maybe it saves time in one step, but adds complexity somewhere else. So I go back to the way I was doing it before, and the same thing happens with your AI tools. A lot of us try them. We've experimented, maybe we've gone through training, we generated something, and the result was fine, right? But then you had to edit, you had to reword it, you had to rework it, you have to double check to make sure everything is completely accurate. And when you compare that to just doing it the way you used to, doing it the old way, a lot of times it doesn't feel like a time saver. So we quietly revert. And again, we're not doing it because we want to buck the system or be resistant to change or don't want to, embrace the new AI, but because in our own lived experiences, it hasn't actually made my workflow meaningfully better. It hasn't saved me that time that was promised. And that's why the explore becomes so critical. When you use AI for the sake of AI, instead of anchoring it to a very specific high friction part of the workflow, something that is painful, something that is measurable, people will kind of test it once, experiment with it, play around, and then default back to what's more efficient. It's human, right? It's not like we're trying to be rebels here. But, what's when you start with a problem instead of the means to fix that problem, right? Then you can actually get to the heart of how we can integrate AI to make our lives meaningfully better. So I'm going to, again, give an example and please think about what this looks like in your organization. I'm going to use kind of a generic example. Hopefully all of us can relate to in some way, um, whether being the manager or being that employee that's using the tool. Most managers, or again, if we're the one on the other side of the table, um, have meaningful one-on-ones from time to time. And you're supposed to be giving thoughtful feedback and writing performance reviews and creating development plans. And almost all of us want to do that really well. But it's one of the first things that gets rushed. We have a million things on our plate every single day, and kind of remembering everything that was said, every action that somebody took, it gets very difficult. Reviews are often written the night before they're due, right? Right when the system says, don't forget, these need to be uploaded to the system by midnight on the 12th or whatever that is, right? The feedback is rushed, it becomes vague. Development plans turn into generic language because it's hard to be specific when the conversations have happened over the course of 6 months. So if we're looking at that as the point of friction, right? And then we're applying it to the first E, we would start by asking, how do we roll out, we wouldn't start by rolling out AI and thinking of how do we roll out AI for performance management? We'd start right at that point of friction, right? What is the specific problem that we're trying to solve? Is it managers have a hard time translating their kind of notes and sticky notes and one-off Word docs that they have into really actionable feedback? Um, is it that the documentation just takes too much time? Is it that, you are having these conversations, but then you still don't feel prepared because you can't recall things that happened 2, 3 months ago? When you get to that level of detail, you're talking about something that is a lot more concrete than just, I want to improve the time it takes me to do performance management. You can then measure, right? And we'll get to evaluate toward the end the time it takes to complete reviews, or the quality of your feedback, completion rates, even the employee's perception of that feedback, right? If you're giving feedback in a way that it cannot be received, maybe there's something out there can help you do better at that. So starting with one very specific use case, maybe helping them turn their notes into some structured feedback, right? Now what you want the tool to do isn't abstract, isn't just improving the performance management process, right? You're solving something that the managers are already feeling is a difficult part of their job. And that will get a lot more buy-in and a lot better results. So starting at that very beginning stage, right? And then working toward a very specific goal. Okay, so I'm gonna pause for a second, and I am gonna ask you to drop some things in the chat here. Think about your day-to-day for a second. What is one workflow that feels harder than it should, right? Just go ahead and throw those in the chat. Is it reporting? Is it status updates? What is it for your particular job? Go ahead and drop some answers in the chat. Reporting. I see one person saying reporting. Reviewing content, absolutely. My previous position with ELB was as an instructional designer, so I'm definitely bringing a lot of the very specific examples that instructional designers go through to the table. Silly administrative things, technical reviews. Yeah, all of these are things that we can think through that they're things that should be made easier with AI, right? They're things that we should be able to really convert. But if we don't have the right tools, understand the problem that we're solving for, right? A lot of these tools just don't do what we're looking for. Yep, these are all really great examples. And one thing I want to just call out, if you're looking at everybody's answers, I don't see anyone on here seeing they need more features in their email. I don't see anybody in here saying they need another tool to learn to get through their day, right? The tools aren't the problem, right? But they're often the starting point, right? Everybody here is naming things that are sucking time away from them. I need an agent to help me keep up with tool exploration. That might be a good tool to add to the list for sure. We're talking rework, we're talking data, we're talking, notes consolidations. I still have lots and different notes documents from meetings that I have, right? That's a signal, right? These are exactly the kind of problems you want to anchor to first. Because if you start here with this specific list that hopefully, if you're a leader, you're seeing, and if you're you can take back to your leaders, you're not asking for the tool itself, right? You're aiming for something that's very specific that's already costing you time and energy. And yes, and they will tell you you need training for this and that. Absolutely. And being somebody that is in the training space, I certainly do not want to say that training isn't important, but because it definitely is, but it has to be the right training. Like we've probably all sat through, I know I have, a generic, here's how to use Gemini, right? And here's how to prompt it, here's not how to prompt it. But at the end of the day, for most tasks that I'm completing, those really aren't helpful tips. So thank you. Thank you. Keep the answers coming in the chat and we will get back to hopefully some Q&A if we have enough time toward the end, but please go ahead and Liz, let me know if there's anything that I'm missing.
Looks great. No questions so far.
Okay. All right. So if explore, we're moving on to the next E. So we understand now that we need to identify a specific friction point, a specific problem, a specific time suck that we're going to try to address. The next E, the next step in the process is making sure, is embed and making sure the solution actually lives inside the work, right? You have to identifying the friction's not enough. If AI stays separate from how work really happens, it never really just becomes part of your workflow. It just becomes extra. It becomes one more thing that you have to do. It becomes something people experiment with occasionally, but not relying on consistently. And, work is rarely clean, right? Hence the messy little doodle over here. It happens across multiple systems, often with incomplete information, under time pressure, with compliance constraints. People are always juggling competing priorities while trying to get something out the door. I know that's definitely something that I struggle with. Um, and if a tool only works, again, going back to training, if it only works in the training environment with very specific examples you're trying to work through, meaning it doesn't translate clearly into someone's real day, it's not going to survive contact with real work, right? Embedding means that you are designing for the reality of our daily lives, right? Right from the beginning. It means asking how the tool shows up inside the systems that we're already using, what changes in our day-to-day process, and what expectations need to shift. Adoption can't happen in theory. It can't happen with these, brief scenarios that you might be going through as a practice exercise. It happens in the context of what we actually have to accomplish every day. And if we don't account for that context from the beginning, again, we're just going to revert back to what feels manageable and we know can get the job done. So another pattern, here's what we'll see, and we'll go through patterns that we're noticing for each or all these different E's that we're covering. Organizations roll out a tool, people are trained, hopefully, and the access is now in place. But the way that work is actually getting done doesn't change. You're going through the same approvals, the same documentation, sometimes the same timelines. So using AI can become something extra, something you don't have time for. You don't have time to learn how to weave it in. And if it's another step in your process, it's not going to, and it doesn't replace any of the things that you were already doing, and it's just adding effort instead of removing effort. You're going to make the practical decision, right? You're under a real deadline. Go back to what you already trust. That's why embedding it requires more than just introducing the technology. It means looking at your entire workflow and asking a different set of questions. What part of the process can disappear? Is there a step in the work that needs to start a little bit earlier? What steps should become easier or faster? If the answers to that question, if to those questions aren't clear and the workflow tries to stay exactly the same, the new tool never becomes part of how work will actually happen. So, what does embedding look like in practice, right? When embedding does happen, the difference can really show up. Instead of people finishing their work and then deciding whether to try a tool, the tool becomes part of the work itself. I'm going to go back to the manager feedback example, right? Traditionally, that might happen at the end of the quarter, or maybe it's just twice a year. With AI embedded instead of an extra step, right? That process can start earlier. You After each one-on-one conversation, I saw one of the chats that said something about like compiling all the notes and doing all these different things. But if you have an AI tool that after each one-on-one, it captures the notes, can generate structured drafts, it can really organize the entire conversation and then merge those every time you're having those conversations. Then when you get to the end, you really have something actionable to work for, something where you can write really meaningful feedback on. And then going to take that training example again, right? So if you need updates to a project, if you have a course that's been out there and you need it to get updated, a lot of times you're juggling trying to get subject matter experts to all dump all of their information and things at the same time. And we all know it's very difficult to get very busy people up to the table. But if as feedback is noticed, as things are noticed within the course, you had a tool that would actually start gathering all of that information. So when it's time to make those changes, all of their feedback is already compiled. It could be a real difference in the steps, right? Changing the sequence, you can start the process earlier, the task becomes faster, handoff to the developer or instructional designer can be much easier and cleaner. The workflow actually changes, and then new behaviors start to feel more natural rather than just either optional or just another step in the process. So we've talked through exploring the friction. We've talked through how it needs to be embedded in the workflow. So then you get to the enablement section, right? It's about aligning expectations around that new workflow. Because even when you identify the right problem and redesign the process, your behaviors are not going to shift unless the signals around that behavior, can change too. And I'm going to speak kind of from this management perspective and to managers, if you're here with us today. Managers play really an outsized role here. Not because we're micromanaging or because we're trying to control everything, but we shape things that get prioritized. What gets reviewed? What does good look like? What am I expecting to see back from my employees on a day-to-day basis? How are we acting if an employee is trying a new AI assisted approach? Are we giving them the time and the latitude to be able to figure out the best way to do that and guiding them through that process? Um, if we're expecting the outputs to look exactly the same on an old timeline with no room for iteration, the signal is pretty clear. And the safe move for employees is to revert because if our expectations haven't changed, then they're going to be nervous to try new things. Again, enablement's not all about training managers on features. It's about helping them understand, what is changing, what are the new expectations, and how do I reinforce this behavior, and make sure that they feel supported in this space. We can have all the workshops and the trainings we want, but culture isn't built there, right? Culture is built in the day-to-day working. And leaders need to consistently, leaders do consistently reward, certain things. And we need to make sure we're rewarding this progress and the intentions that people are having as they are trying to figure out this new AI world. And so we have to be asking the right questions. Not why does this look different, but how did you approach this? Did the new tool help? Find out. Like, is this really making a meaningful difference, or have I just added extra step and extra work to my employees' plates? You got to make sure that everyone is aligned with those expectations. And so going back to, kind of what we're seeing here, when enablement isn't fully in place, you're really going to see a decline in its use. Using AI effectively is often an iterative process. If you've ever prompted ChatGPT or Gemini or any or Claude or any of those, a lot of times the first draft that you get is not where you need it to be. People have to have time to learn how to get the right outputs and what the expectation should be, right? At the beginning, the process might take a little longer. You've gotten this tool with the goal of making people more efficient and faster and getting to the end result in a much more effective way. But we have to be realistic that, sometimes it's going to take a little longer up front. Um, Especially if the tool is not integrated into the workflow and it's just an extra step. Um, Many managers are reviewing the work as if the process should already be optimized. You have this new tool and it's just magically going to get better just because you have this access now. Expecting the same speed and polish when it is very first, like when you first establish it, is simply, not realistic. So I'm hoping if your manager is, encouraging you to use all of these tools, they're giving you that chance to experiment. The new AI assisted approach, might at first take an extra step or two. And again, if the manager is not being responsive to that and understanding that, it's very easy to revert back to the normal way. And a lot of times it's not even because someone is resistant to the tool, right? You're just focused on hitting that deadline, delivering a reliable result. But if you're not acknowledging that early experimentation, iteration are part of the learning, just like any other thing, any other tool, um, you know, it's really hard to get fast, it's really hard to get past those first few attempts. And people will just revert back just so that they know they're meeting the expectations that are in there for them. So for managers, it's really important to understand that at the beginning things are going to look different. Make space for that. Make sure that you're working those into deadlines. And know that a short period of iteration is really what's going to lead to some meaningful results that you're looking for. So what does it look like when it's done well, right? We said when it's not done well, people are going to revert because they're going to go right back to what they were doing before. It's really important that everyone is brought along for the change early. It's not important that everyone is a technical expert right up at the front, but it is important that everyone has a seat at the table and has a voice to be able to say what's working, what's not working. It's important to know what good looks like now. Is it okay for the first draft to be AI assisted? Are timelines adjusted while people learn? Are you reviewing outputs differently? Are you looking at them differently? If all of those things aren't clarified, people will just assume the old standard applies. And again, the shift needs to be reinforced, right? It's not slapping a technical manual down on a desk. It's not giving people a checklist or, referring them to YouTube. You've got to make sure you're reinforcing this new process and really giving people that time and space to embrace it. And then asking the right questions, right? Ask, did AI help, right? And be open to hearing the answer. I think a lot of people just want to, feel like it's magic, right? It's just going to make all of our lives simpler and easier, but it's just not the way anything works. And we have to look at AI the same way we look at any tool, something that we have to learn, something that's going to take time. And if it wasn't working, right, find out like how could we streamline this process next time? Show me how you're using the tools, get feedback from others. From managers especially, the small signals really do matter. Because again, to build this culture that you're looking for, it's gonna take time and the repetition of expectations and giving everyone space to be able to kind of voice their opinions and give their feedback on what is and isn't working. I will pause here for a second before we get into, I've got one more on enable, but I want to pause for a second to see if anybody has any questions they want to ask before we kind of get toward the end of the time.
Yeah, Becky had a really good question a little earlier. How do you manage governance with the source data?
Um, I will kind of not really defer on that question, but it definitely kind of depends on your organization. Within different organizations, there's obviously different levels of security and things along those lines. So it's really important to work with your AI team if you have one, your tech teams, and just know kind of what can and can't be used. But yeah, it's important, and it actually is one of the things that holds a lot of people back from using AI because it is a concern for sure.
Perfect. And before you get started, I just want to note Michelle's comment. Fabulous. No questions yet, but I love your statement about how enabling is more about consistent signals. So love the comments. Keep them coming.
Right. And I will try to get through in time so we can throw some more questions out at the end. But I will go to now. Hold on, we can get the. Okay. So a question for the audience, only formal poll of the day. Let's make it practical, right? Let's think of how our performance is reviewed in your own organization. And what signal would you say carries the most weight? Speed, accuracy, process compliance, innovation? Which one of these for your particular organization seems to be what is most highly regarded? All right. Seeing some a little bit go up and down, but right now, accuracy and risk reduction is top of the list, which I actually think is a good thing. All right, give everybody just another few seconds to get your answer in. All right, fantastic. So we had accuracy and risk reduction, and then a very close margin between speed and following established processes, and innovation and experimentation at the bottom. Not surprising at all. I actually am glad accuracy is top of the list. But when you're worried about accuracy, it's one of the most times that people are going to be hesitant to lean into AI. Whether we're talking hallucinations or we're talking, just inaccurate reading of data and input information. If that is the highest concern, which I do think, in my personal opinion, it should be, um, you're not going to lean into AI as much as maybe some leaders want you to because you're not confident that the output will meet the quality and the compliance, right? Going back to the governance expectations. So without clear guidance on, what you can and can't do and the experimentation and the level of, latitude that you have, that will definitely be something that causes some hesitancy and something that needs to be addressed by your organization. Just really quick with speed. When speed dominates, whatever method you're using, it's the one that's going to get the job done the fastest. AI is certainly good at that in a lot of different ways, but when it starts affecting the accuracy, obviously that can become a problem. Innovation experimentation, that's where AI can shine. That's where, people can embrace. But again, in the real world workflow, all of these are interdependent, right? And just to really quick, not skip over processes, when processes are at the heart of everything that you do, again, if you're just adding a step, it's going to become very difficult. You're going to want to follow those exact processes. And if leadership and management has not built AI into said processes, then you're not going to do it because you want to make sure that you're following the processes that are laid out in front of you. So great. Thank you for all your answers there. Okay. So we've talked through finding the friction point. We have talked through everything that can kind of get us to a point where people are going to hopefully start embracing new ways of work if you've been empowered in the proper ways to do so. Like any new part of our job, it's really important to do the evaluation. And I will relate this kind of back to training again, right? We always know when we first make a course, we got to then, review it, iterate on it, and then once it's launched, we need to evaluate the impact, right? Unfortunately, what we're seeing now, and it is relatively new in this, the timeline of business and workforces, but right now, evaluate is still one place where AI initiatives quietly stall. Organizations tend to measure what's easy to count. Um, Training, we might be counting how many people took this course, how many people completed it. In the AI world, we might say how many people do we have licensed on this tool? Or you have a dashboard, a usage dashboard that says, how much are we actually utilizing this? We measure those because they're easy, right? They're clean, they're reportable, you can get solid data on them. They show activity, but activity is not the same as impact, right? It's not really showing anything that has measurably changed things. In a course, you can have strong completion rates, but not see a measurable shift in whatever the objectives that course was built for. You can have widespread access, right? Everybody has a login to XYZ, but then you see very little change in turnaround time, quality, or the outputs. Um, Evaluating is about shifting the focus from just those adoption metrics to operational metrics. If AI is truly embedded, a bottleneck should shrink, and error rate should decline. And if those shifts aren't visible, that's useful information because it either means the use case wasn't anchored in a real world problem or not embedded deeply enough to affect behavior change. Measurement creates clarity and it forces you to find what better actually means before you can declare success. You can't say something is successful just because it's being utilized, right? Ultimately, this evaluation is what's going to connect that investment that you're making to the bottom line if you're talking financially, or for a lot of us, are our lives easier? Am I doing my job faster? Am I working less late nights, right? You've got to be able to measure those things as well and not just how many people have access. So, really quick on this pattern that we see when things aren't done well, organizations are tracking the wrong numbers, or unfortunately, the success criteria wasn't clearly defined in the first place. They're looking at, are people using it? Does it seem helpful? But if you're starting, like we said at the beginning, with a clearly defined friction point, right, then the metric becomes obvious. If the problem was it's taking way too long to create storyboards, right, is the shift actually made our jobs faster? Are we actually creating these outputs much, much faster? But I don't want to say that is the only metric that needs to be measured because when you have that clear starting point, you can get to that first metric, but there's always a second layer that sometimes is overlooked in a lot of organizations, right? Let's just talk to speed to execution on a course or something along those lines. If the process becomes faster, you also need to look at what happened to the quality, right? Did the error rate stay the same? Is there a lot more subject matter expert feedback? Is there a lot more iteration that needs to be done? You've got to include both that primary and secondary, or third, fourth, right, types of metrics in there. Those guardrails will help confirm that the implementation isn't creating new issues because you solved for a first one. When those pieces are in place, looking at the big picture, measurement stops just reporting on activity and starts giving you a clear picture of what the work is actually improving.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for kicking us off.
Yeah,
Just such a great topic.
absolutely.